You know, after finishing Trails to Azure, there's something I just don't really understand about this series anymore. But before I get into that, in case you're new to this series, I've been going through the Legend of Heroes games for the better part of a year now, and I started with Trails in the Sky first chapter, and now I'm finally finished with Trails to Azure, and I'm here to talk about it. And I have to say, I was not ready for where this game went. I'm not going to get into spoilers. There's a timestamp down below that you can see where I get into spoiler territory. So until then, sit back, relax, and let's kind of break down some of the non-spoilery stuff first and foremost. Now, if there's one thing that has been consistent throughout all of these games is the combat. One of the things that they tend to do with each new game is add in a little spice, a little bit of a new layer, a little bit of extra stuff to make the combat more complex, but not really overwhelming. And in Trails to Azure, you're introduced to the Master Quartz, which is a new type of ornament that specializes in a specific set of buffs or abilities that are either ongoing effects or they activate at the beginning of each fight. And I really like this new addition. This allowed me to kind of narrow down my characters in regards to their job or class type of thing, if you're familiar with Final Fantasy. And it allowed me to just make my characters more succinct, or I guess just more narrow in regards of what I want them to do and to be capable of in each fight. And one of the other cool things about the Master Quartz is that as your characters level up, the Master Quartz levels up. So the abilities that it bestows upon each character level up and get more powerful. For example, I had a Master Quartz tied to Randy that would give him a stack, just a single stack, of shield or invincibility, whatever you want to call it, at the beginning of each fight. As that Master Quartz leveled up, it now gave him 2 stacks of invincibility at the beginning of each fight. So he could handle 2 hits, which was really nice, especially at the end of the game when all the bosses were just going crazy, one-shotting me left and right. It just, again, I'm not going to get into spoilers, but I will just say the end of this game really was quite the gauntlet. And it's because of these Master Quartz that it allowed me to spec Lloyd as an evasion tank, which basically made him dodge pretty much anything and everything that any enemy could throw at me. It was kind of awesome. But as I mentioned a second ago, let's talk about the difficulty in this game. Now, in my last review, I mentioned that I was going to play these games on normal from here on out, and I did that with Trails to Azure. Unfortunately, I ran into the same issue that I did in Trails in the Sky first chapter. Crazy difficulty spikes. I would find myself breezing through enemies in the open world and just having a good old time, but then I would get knocked hard flat on my derriere whenever I encountered a boss. It's almost like the open world enemies served no real purpose in preparing me for the final boss of that area or chapter or whatever it may be. And this would annoy me, because I would often lower the difficulty in order to retry so I could get past that boss. Now, this isn't really a knock against the game itself. This is typical JRPG fare. This is kind of how the bosses work in these games. But it left me wondering, why am I even playing these games on normal if I'm just going to lower the difficulty so I can get past these bosses? Honestly, I think just given my time and where I'm at as a gamer, I think I'm just gonna play these games on easy going forward. Now, that's about all I can really say about this game without spoiling stuff. Let me just say, for those of you that are watching this for whatever reason, wondering if you should play this or play this series, yes, you should. It's incredible, it's amazing, but don't just jump into Azure. That's crazy. So let's get into the spoiler stuff about this game, because with this being a follow-up to Trails from Zero, I can't really talk about this game's story, its characters, really a lot of stuff without spoiling things. And that leads me to the thing that I just don't understand about this series anymore. How is this series not more widespread in enjoyment? Why is this series so slept on? When I finished Trails to Azure, I was literally sitting there watching the credits and just wondering, why is this series not as big as like Final Fantasy, Persona, Dragon Quest, those sorts of games? Because the writing in these games is insane. I've related these games to Brandon Sanderson-like novels before, and that's even more reinforced when I finished this game. I don't even think that sentence made sense, but now I'm tripping over my words. I don't care. That's how good the writing is in these games. It makes me trip over my words. For example, the places that this game went with some of the characters and the villains. I'm getting ahead of myself here. I want to touch on Lloyd's character first. In Trails from Zero, Lloyd's main drive is to be part of the SSS, honor his brother's legacy, and avenge, not really avenge, but seek justice for his brother and find out what happened to him. And in this game, you find out, and it's pretty surprising. Was not ready for it. But there's this moment where Lloyd finds out, goes through the whole ordeal, fights the final boss, and he's in this limbo thing because he's trying to rescue Kia, who, by the way, wound up being a Septarion that can control time and reality, but I'll get to that here in a second. And Lloyd's in this like limbo type mysterious place, and he comes face to face with his brother Guy, and they have this sweet moment together where they're bantering back and forth. That's where Lloyd gets closure. I gotta be honest, that scene broke me. Trails from Zero made me ugly cry, and Trails to Azure made me ugly cry at the end as well. I can't keep playing these games if they're gonna keep doing this to me. I can't take it. It's very overwhelming. But again, this is a testament to this game's incredible writing. This game has so many revelations or twists that there was multiple times I would put the controller down, shut the game off for the night, and go, I just can't take anymore. That I was not expecting that. The new characters, the Red Constellation, what are they called? It's not like a Jaeger Corps group, but you get the idea. They're like a mercenary group that is actually led by Randy Orlando's family that he left because he just doesn't want to be part of that life anymore. That tension that was at play throughout the game because of that was incredibly good. The way that they expanded the scope of the things that are at stake in this game was incredibly good. The geopolitical stuff in this game that gave me flashbacks to Mobile Suit Gundam was a joy for me. I loved all the geopolitical stuff going on between Calvard, Crossbell, and Erebonia in between, and as Dieter Croy rose to power in a really just dictator way. It's another thing I wasn't expecting. There was a point I remember playing this game and going, is Dieter Croy a bad guy? He's talking like a bad guy. Okay, he's assuming authority. He's a bad guy. Oh, he's in league with Ouroboros. Oh, his family has been part of this cult thing for ages, and it blew my mind, man. And then how that stuff just kind of fell apart, and then you hear about a civil war going on in Erebonia, but they're Erebonia sending forces and Calvard sending forces to Crossbell to take back territory, and he's basically starting a war. Dieter Croy basically started a war, and just the stakes were so big in this game. Look, Trails in the Sky, the stakes in that game, they felt very local to liberal, right? But in this game, it blows that scope up so big that it's expanding an entire continent. Man, the fallout from the events of this game, I can only imagine, are going to be massive. But the other thing that blew my mind was the whole thing with Mr. Grimwood actually being the one who killed Guy's brother and is in league with Ouroboros, and how all that stuff worked out. And then Kia wound up being a Septarion that can control time and reality, which led to one of the biggest mind-blowing things in a game that I have come across yet. At the beginning of Trails from Zero, Lloyd and the gang are going into basically the final area of the game, and you start the game off that way, but then it does a flashback to where Lloyd's arriving in Crossbell. And you typically don't think anything of that. You're like, oh cool, the game's giving me a glimpse at what the end of the game is going to look like and kind of what the stakes are, and now we're going to build up to that gradually. And you reach there in Trails from Zero, you play through it, you beat it, you don't think anything of it. In Trails to Azure, it's revealed that the opening of that game is an alternate timeline where Lloyd and the gang died because they never met Ren, and Ren doesn't come in and help them at the end of the game, and they all die. But Kia saw that and then reworked the time reality thing, kind of like Kang the Conqueror does in Marvel Snap, and reset everything so they're alive and they have another opportunity to meet Ren. And because they do meet Ren and they work with her and help her meet her family and get connected with Estelle and Joshua, it allows her to show up at the end of the game and save the group, thus leading to a different timeline. That blew my mind. And again, it goes to the testament of the writing of these games. That is some next level big brain setup stuff that I did not see coming. And then plus the other thing that just made this game great was my boy Kevin showing up at the beginning. He showed up and I was like, let's go, my boy Kevin here, Reese is here. Man, I'm loving this game. Unfortunately, Kevin doesn't really show up much else beyond that outside of close to the end of the game when he's helping Lloyd and them kind of gather the Gralsritter around. And by the way, the reveal that Wazy is an undercover Gralsritter agent, oh my gosh, dude, so cool. so stinking cool. And then, oh man, and then the moment when Ren, Joshua, and Estelle show up in, what is it? Is it chapter 4, the interlude? I think, no, it's the finale chapter. And they're fighting this Aeon, and the Pater Mater sacrifices itself. I'm just like, dude, this game is getting me so stinking hyped on so many levels, to the point where it had me reconsidering something I had said in my last review. In my last review, I'd mentioned that, you know, if you don't have access to the Sky Trilogy games because you're playing on console, then Trails from Zero is a good starting point into this series. But after I finished Trails to Azure, I'm not so sure. That rhymed. Because again, these games' biggest draw are its characters. In Azure, it brings some characters back in really interesting and unique ways that if you're just tuning in from Zero to Azure, you're gonna miss some of that. And I don't really think you're going to understand kind of the significance of those characters returning and doing what they do. But honestly, if Falcom would just touch up the Sky Trilogy games and put them on current gen consoles, it would make my life so much easier in recommending this series to people. But speaking of the Sky Trilogy, this kind of begs the question, how do I rank these games? Where do I rank? Do I prefer the Sky Trilogy over the Crossbell duology? And if I'm honest, I think I prefer the Sky Trilogy over Crossbell duology. Now, don't get me wrong, Zero and Azure were awesome. I loved Crossbell, I loved Lloyd and the gang, I loved meeting the characters, I loved where the story went, I loved the advances to the combat system, and I love that swanky new vehicle they give you in this game that you can customize and, you know, really deck it out and have some fun with it. But I think it's the characters of the Sky Trilogy that I found myself missing the most. When Kevin showed up and then was absent for most of the game, I was bummed out. It made me want to go play Trails in the Sky the Third again. And when I saw Estelle and Joshua and Ren show up to fight that Aeon robot, it made me want to go play Trails in the Sky Second Chapter again. It just made me want to go relive that whole entire trilogy, yes, even Sky First Chapter, because I just miss those characters, miss that area of the continent, I miss that story. But again, it's not really to say that Crossbell duology is bad, it's just, I think personally I prefer the Sky Trilogy, and that's just me. However, if I had to rank these games, I think I would rank them as Sky Second Chapter being number 1, because that is one of the best JRPGs I've ever played. And then second would be Sky the Third, because I really, really love Sky the Third. You get to play as Kevin the entire game. That's perfect for me. And then below that would be Trails to Azure, below that would be Trails from Zero, and then at the bottom would be Trails in the Sky First Chapter. Now again, that's not to say any of those games are bad necessarily. It's like trying to choose cheesecake, but they all got different toppings and they're all good for their own reasons. But I've rambled on long enough, and suffice it to say, I really love my time in Crossbell, and I'm very curious for what the future has in store for Lloyd and the gang, because the game, it really does end on a dour note. It's really somber because Crossbell is occupied by Imperial forces, and you see these stills of Lloyd and the gang kind of sneaking around Crossbell, which I think might have been scenes from Trails from Zero, but I think some of them are post-game Azure stuff where it's leading into some of the Cold Steel stuff. So I'm left wondering what's going on. Speaking of Cold Steel, that now means I'm caught up to the point where now I can start Trails of Cold Steel, which actually I'm already a couple hours into Trails of Cold Steel 1, and I gotta say, I'm actually really enjoying it. I can see where some of my friends kind of made the connection with Persona a little bit, with the calendar and the school setting, and you're building relationships and joining clubs and doing all that. I can kind of see where they were going with it, but I have a feeling it's going to be very different from those games in some very cool ways. And with that, that is my review, thoughts, everything on Trails to Azure. I could have made this video a whole lot longer, but I have to edit this and get it out in a reasonable time. So let's continue the conversation down in the comments below. And I want to know, what about you? Have you been playing the Trails games along with me over the last year? I want to know kind of what your experiences have been with these games. So let's talk in the comments about that as well. But before you leave a comment, don't forget to like this video. I always appreciate it when you do that, and consider subscribing to the channel if you want more content like this, as well as checking out our podcast that covers gaming news and more. And summer is almost here. I'm very much looking forward to it because that means I'll be able to get more videos out at a more consistent pace. So I'm very excited to continue this journey through this series. So that being said, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.